So after my recent video on the way Britain is being visually rebranded, I wanted to dive deeper into this issue and also bring in someone who has been raising similar concerns in a different context. So Patience Xina, as some of you may know, so she's a fellow YouTuber who has fearlessly and gracefully tackled a lot of cultural and identity issues with a clear analytical voice. And I thought she would be a strong voice on this topic because I remember a video of hers that went viral over a year ago where she spoke about race swapping in relation to The Little Mermaid.
So they're essentially having to celebrate their own erasure in order to come across as open-minded and inclusive and progressive. And it's messed up. Imagine being put in a situation where you're forced to celebrate your own representation being erased in order for you to be deemed as being on the right side of history.
And she has touched on these themes at other times too, especially this idea that ordinary people aren't reacting particularly just to skin color for the sake of it, but to this pattern of cultural editing that feels inauthentic and sometimes imposed from above. So it's a fair question to ask. What is driving this push to rewrite familiar characters, and why is there a need to shame or smear anyone who notices? I hope you really enjoyed this conversation as much as I did.
So what is your own general view on representation and this idea of representation and the need for representation for certain groups?
I did a video on this myself actually, on like, does representation actually matter? Because my views on representation have changed a lot over the years. In the beginning, I think I was more of the opinion that it does matter and it just needs to be done correctly. But as time's gone on, I feel like it's more of a case of it. Sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. You know, I think it depends on what we're talking about. Often when this conversation is being had, though, people are talking about media. They're talking about like what they see in films, in advertising and stuff like that. And I think when it comes to that, I don't think it matters for you to be able to see yourself all the time on the screen. And I do think as well that when it comes to television and stuff like that, I do think there is a fair case for representation being representative of the place in which you are at, if that makes sense. Because there is evidence that it can distort people's understanding and perception of their environment. You know, there's people who think there are a lot more of certain groups than there actually are because they're so used to seeing them overrepresented on television or movies, etc. So I think, and I also, someone, when I did my video on representation, someone commented something which I thought was actually quite insightful, because they said, they made a good point. They said the idea of needing to see yourself constantly represented in something in order for you to connect with it. So the idea that you have to have a character look like you to be able to relate to their story or connect with their story kind of implies that we don't have empathy. So the idea that if you have to be Black for me to be able to relate to you or understand your struggle or understand your story, whatever it is, implies that I can't empathize with someone else who's different to me. And it's not a positive idea to put forward, that you can only understand or relate to people who are exactly like you or look exactly like you. So I think it's quite a limiting way of... So in my long-winded way of saying, I think representation matters sometimes, but it also doesn't matter. There are other situations where I think it can matter, like healthcare, stuff like that, but that's completely separate, you know? Like, I think it's, different things look different on different races of people. And so sometimes it's important. So...
It's separate, but it is linked in a way. But before... maybe we might go there because it is a separate thing in itself, but it's still about, seeing or relating to someone who quote unquote looks like you. And to your point about this idea that you need to see someone that looks like you, it's very reductive as well, I find, to be honest. And it actually doesn't stand up to much scrutiny because so many, a lot of the movies and, cartoons and, music, things that we grew up on probably didn't feature people who quote unquote looked like us, but we sang the songs. We wanted to dress like them. We wanted to look like them because there was something that we found in them, or about them that we could relate to. I actually watched your video about She-Hulk, or generally about Disney, and you mentioned She-Hulk. And what happens when you try to force attributes, on someone because you think that, well, they need to represent these kind of people. It's almost sort of flat. And it's like, actually, I don't see, the only thing I have in common with that person is that they're a female or a woman. But what else about them? What are their qualities? What is their story that I can naturally be drawn to? Because I don't relate to the billions of women in this world because they're simply women. No, deeper things connect us: belief, stories, narratives. And I think my next question is about that. I think there is a laziness now, in a lot of productions and things coming out from Hollywood or, the media institution, because there's this push to tick boxes and, okay, let's have one of each, kind of demographic group on screen. But what is the story and where is the creativity there? So do you think that has been lost or diluted so much because people want to, fit or reach racial quotas?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely understand. I've heard arguments for that, and I can see where people are coming from, because I think that's basically what's happened with the whole race swapping situation, where rather than taking the time to create new, interesting stories that happen to feature certain groups of people, you think you can just, change the color of already existing characters and then call it a day and say, look, there you go, there's some representation. And so it can play into like the laziness that you're describing, where people think as long as you can put a diverse cast, or as long as you can put someone who is of a certain race in, just put them in the film, doesn't really matter so much about the story, or whether or not you're actually taking the time to create something interesting and something new that can invite people to want to have that story with a main character who happens to be of a different physical feature, whatever it may be. I think it can cause people to become lazy if that's their main priority. And I do think in general with Hollywood, I think a lot of people would agree that there's way too much emphasis on how certain characters look and what their sexuality is, or what their, all these superficial things that most people generally don't care about, and a lot less time spent on actually writing good stories and actually doing proper good storytelling. So yeah, I think if your priorities become distorted and you're more focused on diversity quotas, then yeah, I do think sometimes some people think that's all it takes to have a good film or a good TV show, or a good advert, or whatever the case may be. And so they don't put as much effort into the stuff that really matters, which is ultimately most people don't care what you look like. They just really want a good story most of the time.
Yeah. And what do you think about this, knee-jerk reaction as soon as someone has any kind of objection to it, whether as a whole or maybe to a specific movie or, show, then they're automatically, sexist or racist? I mean, what?
I think it's because, yeah, I mean, I think it's because for some people, representation, like for us, it's quite foreign to think in that way. But for some people, it really does matter a lot to them. Like it matters so much to them to see themselves, or to, feel represented or feel seen. And so I think naturally when someone sees that and sees the very thing that you view as your representation that you feel you really need and really want, when you see someone kind of rubbish that and be like, oh, well, that's not great, or that's crap, or whatever, I think some people take it personally because it's something that means so much to them. They just take it personally and they just assume that, well, you must hate it because you're a racist or because you're a sexist or whatever. But I don't think they can really comprehend that for some people, this stuff is not necessary. They just want good storytelling. And I think, to be honest, that's more Hollywood's fault than anyone else's, because I think if Hollywood had balance in terms of their priorities and weren't just focusing on the aesthetic of how their characters look and how their stories, if they actually focused more on the actual stories that they were telling, I honestly don't think most of this would really be happening, to be honest. I don't think most of these conversations would really be happening.
Exactly.
Because even in my Little Mermaid video, I showed plenty of examples where they've done movies with non-white characters that have been massive successes and are classics. No one had any problems with it then. I think unless everyone's just suddenly become a raging racist overnight, it's very likely that there's other explanations as to why people suddenly have an issue with the more newer stuff, because otherwise those stories would not have been successful and they would not have performed as well as they did. And I think the fact of the matter is back then Hollywood used to write stories with characters that happened to be of these minority backgrounds. Nowadays, it's more so the main focus and the priority is having characters of that background, and the story, the quality of the storytelling just takes a massive backseat.
And you will just lose people. If you take away that story, the rawness, the realness, it doesn't matter what you say. And I'll mention something you said, but another example to about this is, the Woman King.
Yeah, I didn't watch it, but I heard I got mixed reviews. Some people said that it was good. Some people said it was terrible.
But that's what But a tweet from Viola Davis, who I love, who was amazing in, How to Get Away with Murder and all that. But the tweet that came out from her was so disappointing. If you don't go and see The Woman King tomorrow, if you don't buy your tickets, then this is the only time you'll see an all-black female. And I'm like, what about this is the only time you see this kind of story from this lens? And I was just so disappointed. And it's exactly what you're saying. The priority is the identity. I don't care about that. I want a good story. I can't remember the exact film, but it may be the Wonder Woman or something, but maybe you can remind me. And it was marketed as, this feminist, for women kind of thing. And even women didn't go and see it. I don't think you gave a specific example, but there's been cases where, it's targeted for perhaps the Black demographic or females or LGBTQ, and the movie flopped. And it's like, well, why didn't people from your group even go and...
I think I know the ones. I think it was I think it was a Marvel movie.
As it was so disappointed with them.
I think it was the Miss Marvel. I don't know. It was the one where they had her, they had America. It was like a collaboration, French.
Yeah, now it's Miss Marvels or something.
Yeah, something. I think they had like a collaboration of all of these female Marvel superheroes.
Yeah.
And they were it was like the whole team was exclusively female. So it's kind of like a female Avengers type of situation. I can't remember what the movie was now, but no one turned up to watch it. Even women didn't. And there was people writing articles saying like women failed to come and support this. This is the problem though. The problem with Hollywood nowadays is it feels like going to the cinema is a political statement as opposed to a leisure activity. So like now it's like, you're not going to go and buy a ticket and go and watch this movie because it's such a great story, and you're just so you got to go and support it because you have to support the cause. And the fact of the matter is, like, most people just don't think like that, and they don't care about any of that. They just care about the storytelling itself. And so of course these kind of movies are not going to perform purely on the political goal that you're trying to push forward, because most people don't go to the cinema thinking I'm making a political statement to support this particular thing or whatever, so I just think when you have that kind of mentality, it's just never going to work out for you because you're just completely disconnected from how the average person views their films and their television.
Exactly. And what do you think about this idea of trying to race swap and recreate stories, with different identities rather than just creating a new story, based on the characters that you want represented?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very, very vocal multiple times about my opinion on this. I just think it's extremely lazy, and I think the people who cheer it on should really ask for more, because I just think if you want to have representation, or you want to kind of see more stories from people who are from within your demographic, that within itself is not inherently bad. But the question should be, how is it done? And at the moment, it's often done through like some of these like switching of characters. Like they're doing this at the moment with like Professor Snape, I believe, in Harry Potter now. That's the last one that I've heard of where they're doing this. And I'm sure it won't be the last. But it's just like, I can understand the desire to have more characters who... like I said, there's nothing inherently bad with wanting more stories with people who necessarily look like you. I don't personally necessarily agree with that, because I think I can connect to a character more based on what they've been through, what their story is, as opposed to what they look like. But there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to see a character who feels a little bit more like someone like you. It could be you, or it could be someone whatever. But my question is, how how should it be done? Because I don't think race swaps are the way to do it. I think writing original good stories with characters that happen to be like that or happen to look like that is a more effective way of doing it, because it doesn't alienate people. And also on top of that, again, the priority is the story and the character. It just happens to be of that group, as opposed to just implanting them and just for the sake of diversity, and then just giving it out to your audience and expecting them to just absolutely love it and getting upset and blaming them and calling them racists and bigots and whatever if they don't love it. I still can't get over the fact that Hollywood is like one of the only industries where your product can do so poorly and you blame your customers. I just think that's so fascinating. Because can you imagine Apple being like, oh, no one bought our latest release, you're all bigots. Like, they just wouldn't do that. They would just probably scrap it and try another product. But for some reason with Hollywood, it's like the only industry where you can be blamed as a customer for not wanting to buy what they're putting out.
I guess that's why it's seen to be, I guess that's why it feels like it's dying. Do you feel like it's becoming less and less relevant in time?
They're desperately trying to. I haven't really done a video on this stuff yet, but I definitely want to, because it's been a while since I've really touched on like Hollywood, making any videos on Hollywood and movies and stuff. But they are trying to do U-turns, because I saw that there were articles saying that they want to have more white men in their films now, and they are trying to. It seems like they're trying to go back on the whole DEI stuff and the hyper focus on women and ethnic minorities. Apparently they now want to have more men. I don't know if they said white men. I could be incorrectly quoting.
Nothing men is, even saying men is like,
Yeah, because this is the thing as well. It's like, it's the problem that we have with Hollywood is the problem that we also have in politics, which is that you have like a small minority of elite people who are in their own little echo chambers, because they've all kind of been educated the same way and they've all been kind of like engrossed in the same kind of political and ideologies or whatever. So they're so disconnected from like the regular average person. And so they just have these views and opinions of what people want to see and what people want to watch. And they just keep getting it wrong because they're very out of touch. Who said that women don't like seeing like male superheroes? Like, when did that become an established fact? Because there's this whole idea that in order to capture the female base, so the female fan base, you have to now make all the superheroes male or female. But when did women say they don't want to see hot men saving the day? Like, when did we say that? I don't recall us ever saying, no, please take these sexy men off our screens. We don't want to see them, running around saving the day as they do. Like, I just think it's so bizarre. Like, no, we'd rather see these with like this. I personally, like I said in my She-Hulk video, I love a good female superhero, but she can't just be. You can't just make her this like robotic, stoic, like unrealistic female character. Like, if you're gonna make a female superhero, you need to make her actually a woman. Like, you need to make her realistic, because the problem that they're doing with these female superheroes is they're not even relatable. Like, I can't even connect with them. I don't relate to anything that they're experiencing, how they're talking, how they're acting. There's nothing to connect to there. So yeah, it's just I don't think they're dying. I think they're trying to change course, and then we'll see whether or not that helps them. But people are going to the cinema a lot less.
Yeah. I mean, that's for a lot of different reasons, but I mean, definitely audience capture isn't there anymore. And it's so interesting because they wouldn't have had to do this grand announcement of, okay, now we're going to go back to this, if everything just happened naturally, and, if it wasn't, because a lot of things were, anti-men, sometimes anti-woman, like a real woman, whatever that is nowadays, it was a lot of anti-stuff, right? Anti-nature, I would say. Even the thing about having female superheroes. I remember the last Avengers, I think the Endgame, there was a scene where all the female superheroes came together, and that was really nice. It was almost natural. It was just them, fighting the bad guys. But another movie still in the same franchise, I think it was Captain Marvel. And that movie, the reason I didn't really like it and her character is that she wasn't just a strong woman. She almost had to belittle the man and make him look weak. and feeble for her to be strong. And it's just generally across the board. It's like, it's not just a natural, okay, this is my place and this is what I'm going to do. It's almost, no, this is my place and now I'm going to remove you from your place or put you down. And I think that's what people didn't like. And I think, which brings me to my next question of, do you think that there is then, or do you think it's valid, this kind of reaction of the so-called majority group who feel like they're being written out of, movies, well, more so maybe adverts for now, because the reason I asked you on for this was because I spoke about the recent backlash that reform politicians that are approaching received, because she said there were too many, quote unquote, or in fact, she said, I feel mad, something along those lines, when I see a lot of black and brown people on TV. So not the best choice of words, which 99%, most reasonable people agree. But there is a sentiment of literally ethnic minorities are around 13-14% now, of the population. Black people around 4%, but they're making up around,
I think even less than that.
I think so, right? But they're making up around 50%, where you have people, there's, you just don't see, I mean, the John Lewis advert, that that broke the modern rules in a way, but we're not seeing the accurate picture of Britain being shown on our screen. So is there validity then to this anger and this sense of alienation, and how do I navigate that in a more nuanced way?
I think that I think with every single thing, there's always going to be a reaction. And I think that in the same way that woke ideas and were kind of like what everybody understood to be woke, because what happened was all these things happened around the same time, and then people started branding them as woke, right? So it became this thing where anytime you see a black person on your screen, it's woke. Anytime you see like a person with a disability on something, it's woke. Because I remember talking about this as well, because I think Barbie released a doll with Down syndrome, and people automatically like, oh no, I don't want this woke doll, like, and stuff like that. And so I think because of the fact that this stuff has been pushed so much, it's now gotten to a point where some people now just reject it, or reject anything that resembles the thing that they detest, So I feel like sometimes I do think the reaction is over the top, because I personally think it's great for Barbie to have a doll with Down syndrome. Like, there's nothing actually wrong with that. When you really look at that, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's actually quite a nice thing. If Barbie has dolls of different races and different agendas, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with having that additional doll.
Just on that particular point, because there was another Barbie introduction, I think, where she was in a wheelchair. I don't know if it was globally or in America, but I definitely saw it, and I saw the reaction. And what people, because I agree with you. And then what I saw some people say, which I'm not sure whether I agree or not, but I want to get your thoughts on it, was it's not really bad that there's a Barbie in a wheelchair, but sorry, I don't know why I'm laughing, but we don't want to remind people that they're in a wheelchair. Like, they might want to play with the doll because they want to envision themselves not in a wheelchair. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can understand what I guess I can understand what they mean when they're saying that, because the whole point of children playing with toys is to make believe, right? Like, none of us were actually fairies, like, but we like to pretend in that moment that we were. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with, like, if you're gonna have dolls of like different ethnicities, you're gonna have dolls of different, like, you have male dolls, female dolls. I don't think there's anything wrong with having varieties of different characters, in the same way that you wouldn't have differences in terms of like Barbie's been so many different professions, like none of us we're all trying to live through her in like being like a doctor or a pilot or whatever. So I think if someone who's in a wheelchair, if a child who's in a wheelchair wants to purchase a regular doll and like and just kind of pretend in that moment, that's absolutely fine. But I also don't think there's anything wrong with the children who do actually want to have a doll that's also in a wheelchair because they're in a wheelchair. I think, do you know what I mean? I think there's nothing wrong with having that option, because I think stuff like that is what I would classify as true inclusivity. because you're not replacing things and then calling it inclusivity. You're actually giving people more variety. You're adding to the variety that already exists. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. But I think for a long time, the reason why there's been such a massive pushback on what people are calling diversity is because a lot of the time what is called diversity and inclusion is often replacement. Like you're taking away something and then putting something new in that position, and then like you're expecting people to adjust to these changes and just calling it inclusivity and diversity, when in reality what you are doing is replacement. Because if you were being inclusive, you'd be adding to what's already there, not taking things away and replacing them with something different. So that's why I feel like in certain situations, I think when people have had pushback, it doesn't make sense, like with the Barbie situation, because they didn't take away all the fully able-bodied Barbies and then replace them with all these Barbies. They just added more to that. And some children who don't have disabilities might want to buy those dolls and play with them. In the same way that children who do have disabilities might want to play with the dolls that don't have them. You know what I mean? But it's not harmful in any way, because all you're doing is just giving more variety. Like there are different types of human beings in the world. There is nothing wrong with dolls representing that, because dolls are supposed to mimic, human beings anyway. So, but I think that's very different to what people are seeing with the advertisements and with the race swapping or gender swapping that's happening in Hollywood, because that is actual replacement masquerading as inclusivity and diversity. And that's what I think people are often reacting to. Sometimes I do think the reaction is a bit over the top, not because I think that it's wrong that people get irritated by it, but I think it does get to a point where, because people are so sick of it, anytime now they see someone, a minority on screen or anything, like they automatically reject it. Whereas I think before that might not have happened if this wasn't a situation that we were currently in, where they're constantly having too much of it. I don't think in 2000, I don't think anyone would have cared if a Black family happened to be in an advert, because at that time, we didn't kind of have the same climate that we have now, where it seems like that's all you're really allowed to have in advertising is minority families or interracial families. So I don't think people would have cared back then. But I think now, because it's just happening so much, people just can't, they're just kind of sick of it. I think that's more of the reaction that people, that politician that you're referring to, I think that's probably the visceral reaction that she's having. It's not necessarily I hate Black and brown people per se in adverts. It's more of a I'm so tired of seeing them in adverts because it's just happening too much. I think too much of anything is going to make people sick, because I think there is nothing wrong with having minority people in advertising. It's, we do exist. And so there's nothing wrong with putting us in media, but doing it too much and overdoing it is what leads you to reactions like this, I think.
And then having the rationale for overdoing it as being because, the society is racist and, white people are bad kind of thing. So there's another subtle layer. It's not just you're replacing and still demonizing at the same time, directly or indirectly. And there has been a lot of direct, articles and commentaries that the reason that this is happening is because this is an inherently racist, morally evil society. And there has to be some kind of, adjustment. And that's why this is happening. So yes, as you mentioned, it might have been annoying kind of thing, but now people are having this visceral reaction because it's been almost moralizing at the same time, right? Or demoralizing, should I say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree. There definitely is this undertone of we're going to re-educate you through these media means to correct your thinking about all these different groups of people and society, etc. There definitely is that kind of like, we're going to force feed you through these advertisements or television or movies what you're supposed to be thinking, because you inherently have all these bad views, so we're going to fix it through media. And I do agree. I think that's also a big part of the pushback as well.
Patience, it was lovely to have you. As we know from personal experience, we can probably talk for 4 or 5 hours. But we'll cut today. But yeah, thank you so much for your thoughts. Very insightful as always, and hope this can happen again.
Absolutely.